Hey everybody, how you doing? It's Max, Chief Evangelist over here at Happily, and let's talk about HubSpot CPQ, which is the newest product that HubSpot just launched as part of their Commerce Hub SKU. Let's dive into two of the biggest things that they released in HubSpot CPQ, and that is the new tiered pricing feature as well as advanced approvals that you can now do natively in HubSpot, which is really cool. So something you'll notice is when you're creating a new product inside of HubSpot, you now have this new interface, and down at the bottom, you now have two choices: flat rate pricing, and now there is a tiered pricing object. Per product, you have the ability to change the pricing model. You can't have both at the same time, but you do have this ability to enable a couple of different pricing methods around volume. So here you'll notice under pricing method, we can do a volume-based price, we can do a stair-step price, and we can do a graduated price. Basically, to cover these, volume-based is like depending on how many units you actually have, the price per unit will change. You can also change it to be a stair-step model where basically there's like different bands that you're moving through where the price will change depending on how many units, but it's a fixed price. And then you have the graduated, where the total cost of everything is based on the number of units that you have. And that's as far as the tiered pricing goes. And if that's all you need, that's great. You now have that natively available to you inside of HubSpot. If you need anything more complicated than this is where we do things a little bit differently with Quote Happily. The biggest limitations is that this is written at the product level itself, which means it's going to be a little bit less flexible to apply these different pricing methods in different ways in different situations. You're probably going to be forced to have to create the same product multiple times if they can have different pricing methods under different circumstances. Now, it's a lot more flexible in Quote Happily because we do all of our pricing controls at the price book level. You can use different price books in different situations to be able to apply different pricing models when they need to be. If I'm just selling to a run-of-the-mill customer, I might just use my MSRP pricing. I may not have any sort of volume pricing agreement with them. But in certain circumstances, when I'm selling to a wholesaler that I then want to be able to deploy a volume-based stair-step or graduated pricing method, when I sell out of that price book, I'm able to then do it, and I didn't have to make multiple products to support different pricing methods in different situations. So Pricebooks makes it a lot more flexible in that we can have a product just have its own price, but apply different rules to the pricing in different scenarios. I can override a price of a specific product inside of a specific price book. I can switch it to have a volume pricing option. I could do a percentage decrease or a percentage increase, or I can even set up a pricing table. The big difference here in Quote Happily is I don't have to just base it on the quantity. I can base the price on any property that I want. So it gives you a lot more flexibility in the way that you're able to deploy that stair-step method. Not only that, though, you might have a lot more deeper, more complex needs when it comes to how you price things that aren't just simply based on quantity. So if you need any sort of calculated pricing, this is somewhere where HubSpot CPQ falls short. You can't build custom formulas that take way more into account other than just the raw volume to do your pricing. This is where Quote Happily shines, is that we have a calculated pricing tool where you can literally come into here, use any property you want from anything related to the deal or any of the properties on the line item. You can even leave open places where people can enter in their own parameters as they're building the quotes. And you can actually do totally customized pricing based on a formula you create. Let's talk about HubSpot's advanced quote approvals that they just launched, right? This is a gigantic step up from what HubSpot approvals have looked like in the past. The only way that approvals worked before is that you simply could turn on approvals and every single quote would require an approval, and only one person could be the person that approves it. They've changed that dramatically with HubSpot CPQ. However, there are some very big differences, which you may need depending on what your needs are around approvals. So let's talk about how it works in HubSpot. In HubSpot, you either have approvals turned on or you have them turned off. There's two different options. There's standard approvals, where you can choose who does the approvals and all quotes need to be approved. In this case, it's either all approvers or any approver. You can select multiple people that have to approve a quote or anyone from a specific group. But again, still, all quotes need to go through approvals. Now, that is also similar with advanced approvals. Advanced approvals does it a little bit more like we do it in Quote Happily, but they require you to build a workflow. The thing is, all quotes still need to go through an approval. There also isn't any sort of gate to stop a quote from even going to approvals if it's like egregiously outside of the range of what something would be acceptable. When you go and use advanced approvals, what you need to do is you need to come in here and set up a quote approval workflow. The way it works is you actually build a bunch of criteria through a series of branches and adding these steps. And when the quote's going through the workflow, it's not actually in real time as it goes through the workflow, asking for approval and then moving down the chain. You're actually like building this thing called an approval flow that it puts together based on like the rules you had it go through, and then it fires it after the workflow is done. So you add these different steps, then you can do this start an approval flow. Now, if your quote meets a bunch of criteria, moves through it, and avoids any steps where it's adding an approval for somebody, it'll come down to the start approval flow and it will approve it instantly. But the thing to remember is that when that person's building the quote in HubSpot, they're always going to be prompted to send it to approvals no matter what. You don't really have a way of stopping approvals from going to folks in the first place if the people approving quotes shouldn't even be wasting their time with it. So this is where Quote Happily really shines. If you need a lot more protection around the way that you actually send quotes to approval, so you're not wasting the time of folks that don't need to be wasting time rejecting quotes that obviously would have gotten rejected, you can set up rules around when quotes actually require approvals. This is another big thing that Quote Happily brings to the table. This is our rules engine, and this can help you do things like discounting controls. People aren't allowed to discount certain products or discount over a certain amount, or really as they're building the quote, you can provide a lot of guardrails and governance around it. Rules are great, but this is a shining example, approvals, right? So the way you can set it up that if a quote even needs to go to approvals is you can set up rules that say, hey, if the quote is within the range of a 15 to a 25% discount on any line item, for example, then and only then is it actually going to send the quote for approvals. You can also set up blocks. Now, what blocks would do is they would basically come in and make it so that if the quote exceeds a certain amount that you know that your team would never approve under any circumstances, you can stop them from even submitting the quote in the first place, which you cannot do with the current setup in HubSpot CPQ. So that's something to keep in mind. If you value making sure that only the quotes that should go to approval actually go to approval, whereas quotes that are within an acceptable range are automatically able to be sent to a customer and accessible to that sales rep without having to wait for it to go through an approval, you can set that up as well. And to compare how we handle quote-based workflows to do these approvals, what we do is that when a quote actually goes to approval, we use these things called approval queues, which allow you to take them into different workflows depending on the queue you want to send it into based on the rules you have. So like you might say, if the quote has a certain product on it, it must go through approval queue number 1, versus if it doesn't, it can go through number 2. So it gives you a lot more control of what process that quote goes through in a much clearer way. On top of that, our workflows are actually much easier to navigate and understand because as the quote goes through it, it goes through each step in real time. It gets held in a delay and then drops through once it actually gets approved versus it building this whole process and sending it out after. If you need basic approvals and you're fine with every single quote getting forced to go into the approval process, that's fine. But if you need a lot more tighter control over when a quote actually requires an approval and which ones are just too egregious to not even send to approvals, Quote Happily is definitely going to be the way to go. On top of that, if you need things like guided selling, discount control, things like that, these are only things that are available through Quote Happily right now. If you want to be able to ask a height parameter or have a drop down for what product something is for and answer questions and gather data so you can automatically do things like adding line items or changing line item properties or automatically including an onboarding plan and changing that quote in real time as questions are asked. Guided selling is a really great feature that we have through our prompt user actions, which are powered by our rules engine. And then on top of that, bundling. If you want to be able to bundle products together and be able to control the pricing across a number of different price books and give a very clean and clear experience for which products your sales reps should be adding as they're building out quotes, bundle pricing is going to be great for that. However, we are very excited to see a lot more CPQ features getting built natively into HubSpot because ultimately it'll be a lot of things that we can play with too as well on the Quote Happily end. So hopefully that kind of clears up some of the differences between HubSpot CPQ and advanced quoting with Quote Happily. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know. Thanks, everybody.